Hello and welcome to the It discussion. I have two amazing people here today. If you've watched my lives or my channel, you will recognize both of them. I have Bryce, and then from our Big Witcher discussions, and then you will recognize Sarah from all the Dresden Files discussions and anytime I can get her on here, actually. But yeah, I'll let them introduce themselves. Bryce, if you want to, grand entrance.
Yeah. Oh man. So thanks. First of all, I'm actually reading right now More Than Vampire, and it's so good. It's like I'm loving it. It is just, and your audiobook narrators are they're like spot on. Although one thing, the male narrator says, and I think that's just like an English affectation, right?
Thing, yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, all right, we got, but it's perfect. Anyway, I love it. But yeah, I run Shelf Centered, talking about fantasy, science fiction, sometimes horror is what I say. So I do. I love me some Stephen King. I didn't the first time, and I always have to go. I started with The Stand. That was my first Stephen King. And I remember I got 300 pages into the behemoth and was just like, I'm not liking this. Why am I still forcing my way through this? So I gave it up. I put it down, was like, no, it's not for me. I guess I'm just not a Stephen King reader. Right? Well, I like a year or two later pick up The Dark Tower and just absolutely devoured it, loved it. And so then I went back and, and I think actually midway through, I went back, tried the Stand again, and I loved it. So I'm a huge constant reader now. Well, at least I'm aiming on trying to get my merit badge or whatever for being a constant reader. But I'm I've read 20 now. I know it's not even a third, but it's we're getting there.
I mean yeah.
Right, that's what I always talk about. I'm like, you could say oh, I've read 40 Stephen King books, and it's still what are you halfway?
You're like 30 behind or whatever it is now.
Yeah, it is so much. So yes, I'm Sarah. Hello. I apologize for my background. And I feel like I've been saying this for a year. We are supposed to be redoing this room, but when you have children, there's just things you need to buy all the time. So you want to redo a room and you're like, oh, well, I guess I'll push that off for another 5 months now. So it's always messy in here when I'm on stream. But I met Jer, like he said, through the Dresden chats, which were fantastic. And I'm always waiting for the announcement for the newest book so that we can read it and talk about it. But for Stephen King, I have been a Stephen King fan for a really long time, but I read relatively recently in my Stephen King journey. So it was a couple of years ago. These guys are going to have to boost me up so that I can just add in a comment that sounds really good every now and then. But I'm going to have to pull back.
Yes, I do remember that.
Exactly. But I did really enjoy it. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Wait, what did you enjoy? Just kidding. It's a little It joke.
Which you absolutely got me with.
Well, we all float here, so it's okay. Well, we float, and you guys will float too. Well, I guess you guys kind of answered or started answering a question that I was going to ask you. The first question I was going to ask you guys is, how did you get into Stephen King, and how many did you have in before you read it?
Man, for me, it was literally 20, and I think it's 21 or 22. It's somewhere in there, but I literally just finished it for the first time. And I'm referring to the pronoun it and not the book it each time. But I can't stop thinking about that, so I'm sorry. But I'm in my garage because it's the only place I could get where it was quiet. So,
also appreciate
so I feel you. But it's also creepier, so that's probably better.
Hey, it works.
That's true. This is great because this is a question I know the answer to. So I started
all the stats.
I started with The Talisman. That was my first Stephen King book, and that was when I was about 12. And then after The Talisman, I jumped into The Dark Tower and read through as many of the books that were out at that time, which I think was the first 4. Yes, because I think Wizard and Glass came out in 97 or something. So I think the first 4 were out, and then I began my wait for the rest. And I didn't fill in other Stephen King books until later because my dad was a big fantasy fan, which is why he owned The Dark Tower, but he's not a big horror fan. So he didn't own a lot of other Stephen King books. I think maybe he owned Eyes of the Dragon, and that might have been it. Like, I think it was just the Talisman, the Dark Tower series, and then Eyes of the Dragon. And then I slowly started to get some of the least scary ones as a teenager, and then have started to read some of the scarier ones as an adult. So I put it off for a long time because I thought it would scare me too much. But I read it a couple of years ago and loved it.
Yeah, for me, I was the Gunslinger, the Dark Tower. That was the first anything I read on Stephen King, and just went through, like, I marathoned it because it was just so weird and different from anything I've ever read. Especially once you get towards like the later books, it just gets really trippy. You're just like, where was he coming up with this stuff? But then from there, I went and I was like, I'm loving this stuff. So I went back to his early works, and I went back to Carrie, Cujo, Cycle the Werewolf, all those, really early books. So, and then I just finished it 2 days ago. But yeah, so I probably had like 15 books or so in. So I was probably the least amount of everybody here with Stephen King. But yeah, what was your guys' anticipation when you're like, because this is like the biggest book I've ever read, like right up there. So like, what was your anticipation? Because everyone's like, oh, it's one of the top 2-3 Stephen King books ever. And like, so what were you guys thinking?
Yeah, and I'm like, I feel I'm like,
go for it, Bryce.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I'd seen the miniseries from back in the day, right? So like I knew generally, and I loved, like, I was a diehard like Sci-Fi Channel like head. I don't know, like as even a kid, like I don't know, just I was drawn to that kind of stuff, and so I kind of generally knew, but I also, what I didn't get was like, oh, this is also known as like a lot of people's favorite. Like I think even Mike of Mike's Book Reviews, is it his favorite? Or should I say cryptocurrency Mike? No.
Oh my goodness.
I know. At least he recovered it. He recovered it. But that was like, that's gotta be so scary. But anyway, I forget who's favorite, but it's a lot of people that I like generally like genuinely like respect their opinions, and I'm like, oh man, of course.
This happens all the time at my house too.
I know. Like he's
100%.
on a mission. He's got to go get the geese. All the geese are out, and he wants all of them, even though he's protected behind his little fences. And so he's like, I'm tough now.
Are these Canada
geese?
Geese?
He's like this big. Colorado geese.
Probably.
They're still annoying and ornery.
Are they?
But like, yeah, I know. I'm like, Oreo, what are you doing? Now you guys all know my passwords for everything. Just kidding. I don't even know where I was. Oreo, what are you doing here? But we love him. Come on, buddy. Come here. Okay. We wanted to see what's going on, huh? All right.
The real question is, can we see him? Oh my goodness.
There he is. There's that boy. Sorry,
we're not topping it. Star of the show.
Oh, see.
Right.
I would do that, but then my dogs would take over the whole screen. So I got big dogs, and they would just knock everything over.
Yep.
Oh man. So yeah. It comes down to like with it. I was like, wow, it's like people's favorite, but like, how do you beat The Stand? How do you beat my favorite? Like the first 4. Well, books 2 through 4 of The Dark Tower, and then sometimes 5 I put up there too. Those are my favorites. Anyway, because I love those. The Gunslinger,
don't you hate on the Gunslinger?
I need to reread it, and I liked it. It was enough to keep going, which says something. But it's definitely not been my favorite of the series. But once 2, and then 3, and then 4, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then 5 still up there too. Like anyway, so I was just like, how do you beat that? And after just finishing it, I'm like, I don't know, but I think it's up there. It was so good. Like there's a lot of questionable scenes and language. That like, is hard for our sensibilities now. And at least, we can recognize that. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But anyway, that's my, sorry with that interruption, but that's kind of my general, like, I didn't know really, like I generally knew like kind of, but I was like, people's favorite, really? And now I'm like, yeah, I get it. It's definitely, yep.
I understand. Right. And it has to be good because it has arguably the worst scene he's ever written. And people still all say that it's one of his best books. So you're like, the other stuff has to be really great. in order to make up for it. And most people know what that scene is before they even read it. Like I knew what it was. I was like, okay, this is the book with you know what. I'm like, and so you go in already prepared. Like I went into this book being like, there's no way that it can be good enough to make up for that. And it is. It's excellent.
Yeah.
So in my Stephen King ranking, it definitely is one of my favorites. Especially if I view The Dark Tower as its own thing, like as one entry. So if Dark Tower counts
That's
as
probably
one,
a good call. That's probably a good
give
call.
it one ranking, then it would definitely make the top 3 for me. And depending on the day, between it and The Stand, it's hard to determine which one I like more. But I think I probably like it a little bit more than The Stand. It's definitely creepier. And it's just like it has all the things that he's good at, right? Like it has the coming of age piece, it has the horror piece, it has the weird, like twisted human nature stuff. There's like all of the things that he's really good at doing are all in it. And the reason that I put off reading it for so long is just because I was scared that it would scare me too much. And it didn't, thankfully, but people talk about it as if it is one of the scariest ones. And it is scary, but it didn't scare me nearly as much as Pet Sematary. Because I feel like as a parent, if you read Pet Sematary, you're just like, this ruined my whole life. Right.
Well, and I think you take for granted the fact that you're like, I mean, this kind of, I don't know, you're like, it is such a cult, like it's part of our culture.
Yeah.
That you like, I kept having to try to remind myself the whole time, like, this is kind of like this, I think was like pretty revolutionary. And like, cause we just consider like, the monster in the drain is like Saturday Night Live was just doing a skit about, what's like Kellyanne Conway, like with an it, right? And like, it's just so ingrained and you have to be like, this is like crazy, this whole idea where he took like, I don't know, it even like mentions how it's like, it took the form of a clown, right? Because kids love it. And you're like, well, in our culture, kids, like everyone's a little suspicious of clowns. Okay.
Well, and I will tell tell a story. I don't know if I've told this story on the air, but I watched the miniseries when it, like, I think right as it came out, and it was a bad idea because I was like between 4 and 6 years old. So horrible idea. And I was so scared watching the miniseries because I was watching it with my parent, and then their friend, and I had to I couldn't hardly watch it, and I got sick to my stomach. I was so not because I like the gore or anything like that. Just it was so scary for a little kid, because that's what the whole book's about. It's about scaring kids, and and I always remember that, like thinking that was the scariest, like for the time I was in, that was the scariest movie I had ever seen. Was the mini series. And then I remember when they were announcing like, oh, we're doing the movie, and I remember watching the movie and thinking, because they put a lot into the budget, I'm like, this is the closest thing I have ever seen to a true what a nightmare looks like in your head. Mm-hmm. Because like the graphics were so good, and Stephen King's visuals. And after reading the book, I'm like, the book is way harsher than the movies for sure. But what it did do is like I got those visuals. I'm like, yeah, they were pretty close to what certain things in the book looked like, and they had the budget to really show you the crazy trippy visions that Stephen King puts in there. But like I said, I'd read The Dark Tower, and I'd read several of these books, and coming into it, I was like, it can't because people like, well, they'll put it up there on the top tier. And as you got into it, it's like, because at first it's just telling you stories of these people's lives almost. It didn't feel like a normal novel, where the novel, like normally when you read a novel, especially if you're reading a fantasy novel or something to that effect, it feels like they're trying to tell you about what the story is at the beginning. They're like, all right, let's get you into the story. And then if we want to take sidetracks, this one, it feels like you just come right into their lives. And you're watching their lives up until the point where, the boy's brother, dies, and just the way he was describing him, like he was annoyed by his little brother, like, oh, I gotta fix your boat and I gotta make it, and then just get out of my hair. And at first you really I'm trying to think, was it Ben or was it Bill? It was Bill was the one that it was his brother, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at first I didn't like Bill. Bill kind of came across as a like as an a-hole,
Yeah.
I'm just like, man. And then his brother, then the drain and everything, and just the way Stephen King set that up. The pacing is like, this is, to me, this is King in his prime. I think this was when he was in his prime, because like Sarah said, everything he does well is in this book, and it is
absolutely.
and so, like, what were your feelings as, like, thinking back when you were that age? For me, I felt like, I was like, man, he's really like pulling your childhood memories. Like, that's really what I thought about when I was scared. Like, when I got mad, that's exactly how I thought. What did you guys think?
Yeah, we had a neighborhood bully, like, that we were afraid of, right? Like, he would do things like destroy our sprinkler heads as he walked by, and just like random things. And so and that's the thing King does so well. And you could see what, like, in this was the most important thing was the characters, right? We had to know these characters to know, one, what they're afraid of, for that to actually have the impact that it did, and then just for the whole story to make sense. And so, yeah, he does characters, especially kids, so well. Like, I don't know how, he does it so well that he just like captures, like, especially that I don't know, just that growing up. And especially I grew up with, I think we're a little more paid attention to than apparently in the 50s, where it was just like, we go to the ditch,
Just go.
let's go make a dam, and like, here we go. Like, we couldn't do that, but we had a reign of the neighborhood, and my mom didn't know what was happening with the bully unless we ran into him, and like something happened that he harmed us in some way. And so, yeah, I really felt it. It just, and again, as a kid, you're playing with like certain words, right? So you have like the cussing, and you have I mean, again, it's just some of those, like the F slur is like, you're like, ooh, so glad we like don't say that anymore. And that's a thing as a society we've kind of agreed that's a no. And it's like, because it's hard to listen to, but at the same time, spot on realistic. Like, up to my growing up was like, that was normal. And imagine, like, I don't know, it's just I feel bad. You're just like, who was the bully? Was it me for saying those things as a kid? And so it really like brings a lot home. And I had read, I mean, I've been kind of keeping up. That was my thing, is I need to go back and read all the classic Stephen King, because I've read a number like Carrie, but I haven't read like Salem's Lot or Pet Cemetery. I kind of was hit. Yeah, I'm in and out, but then I've kind of kept up with some of the newer stuff like Billy Summers and Fairy Tale. But Fairy Tale is like such a good one, where you're just so engrossed in just this kid's life. And then halfway through the book, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot this was like a fairy tale. And like, then you actually get into that.
It's so weird.
I don't think that's a spoiler, but like, it was just like, oh man, I was just so deep into this. Like, I just loved being part of this kid's life that he just told it so well.
Most people loved that first half where it was just about the boy's life. And then when it went into the fantasy world, people were like,
what is this? Why? Yeah.
It's on the title. Yes.
Definitely. And I agree. One of the things that Kyle says often is that he feels like Stephen King is good at writing kids from his own era, because the speech and the words that they use are kind of from that time period, which I would agree with, and also add at the same time that even if any of the terminology is dated, which it isn't in it, because it is set in that time. But regardless, if Stephen King is writing modern children, even if the terminology is different, he knows how to write the way that kids talk to each other. Regardless of what they say. So the content, if you take the content out, the dynamics is what he gets right. Because I think what we like to believe, because often the people reading are parents some of the people who are reading are parents, and we like to think that we are teaching our kids to be nice to other people and to share, to treat them kindly. And really, kids are jerks to each other a lot of the time. Like, no matter how hard you try to teach them to be a good person and be kind to your friends, like, that's how you learn social interaction.
Ears are still ringing from this morning's arguments.
Right. And that's, they're learning how to interact. And part of that is fighting and, and using those kinds of words and navigating those situations, being angry and getting those feelings out. And your friends, you spend all your time with them, and that's who you figure that out with. So what he does really well is show you friendships that feel genuine, because it's not just the fluffy, like, oh, you're my best pal and we're having a great time. It's like, you're such an idiot. Why are you doing that? Like, I'm so mad at you. Like, and they have those little squabbles and things that make the relationships feel true to life, and then makes all of the emotional stuff that happens in the book feel so impactful, because that you're seeing their genuine emotions and the way that they feel and the way that they interact. And so I think it makes it a little bit easier to see them as real kids. And that's the terrifying part, because, whether you are a parent or someone who even likes kids, I think there is this sensation that, like, children need to be, like, you don't hurt children. Like, that's just like a rule of the universe. And so seeing it happen here, and like Bryce said, an antagonist whose role is to scare kids, it makes it extra scary for everybody.
Yeah, well, and actually, you
Sorry, that got
just you're Sarah. Very eloquent in the way that you post that. But yeah, I think you're right. I did the audiobook too. So I don't, Bryce, I don't know if you did the audiobook or. Yeah, so I did the audiobook, and hearing them talk, and the language they're using, you're just like, man, like, were we talking like that when we were kids? And then it's like, as I think back, you're like, well, maybe not, like you said, maybe not the exact wording that they're using, but and like Bryce said, when you're, especially your little, 11, 12-year-old boys, you learn what cuss words are. You're just like, yeah. We're rebels. We say bad words.
Right? You want to say it. You want to get it out.
Yeah. So and you're just like, and then just thinking about the dynamics of, because that, even like, I didn't read Harry Potter until like 3 years ago, and I enjoyed it because it's like you can see all the dynamics of the friendships in Harry Potter. It's like, oh yeah, there's a Ron. I know a Ron, or I am a Ron, or a Harry, and that's kind of the way this book really was, because I grew up in kind of the same area, like Derry. I grew up in a town when I was that age. It was like a town of like 400 people. People played baseball, would let their kids just go to the baseball field and let's get a group together and play a game. Absolutely. And blah, blah, blah. So it was kind of the same feeling. And I can see different people in these characters. Like, oh yeah, we had the tough guy who thought he was tough, and that would all protect you guys. And then there was the bully. We all knew who the bully was, and we knew who the tomboy chick was that would just like, I'll take you boys down. We had all those.
And the leader, like you usually had like a leader,
A leader,
and then you had the leader. The leader's like, all right, follow me. I know what we're doing. And everyone's like, yeah, so-and-so knows what he's doing. Let's, or she knows what she's doing. We'll just follow her. But yeah, I mean, and I think that is where I started really liking the book. Like, because like I said earlier, it's like you feel like you're just flowing through people's lives and nothing crazy is really happening for like the first
floating through.
You're floating through their lives. Exactly. Yeah. But then it's like, just the relationships that they build as children, and they really have an impact on each other. And of course, the culmination event and I like how he actually wrote it, how it's like you're bouncing back and forth between childhood and adulthood and adult problems. They talks about all these adult problems that people are having, and then all the problems you had with a kid. So like Sarah, if Sarah read it when she was younger, I'm sure she could understand like the kid problems, better. And then you read it as an adult, you're like, well, yeah, I mean, the problems that these people are talking about. I'm like, I've been there, the house, the mortgage, the dealing with people at work, but so that just kind of gripped me. And then
even just the abuse of like as a kid, and then the abuse as a spouse. It's like, absolutely. Oh my gosh.
Well, yeah,
sadly
and
a dynamic you see often. So
Yeah.
well, and I think that was a thing where I've talked with some other booktubers. I even asked a few of them if they wanted to be on here, and they were just like, I hated the book. Like and they were like,
Sorry.
well, not because of the story. It's just there was things in the book, abuse and stuff like that. It just was too much for them, I guess. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of that, and I don't know if that's what made the book more visceral. Is that like everybody had some kind of issues.
Mhm.
You know, I don't know. What did you guys think about that?
I think it's true to life. Like everybody has some kind of issues, you know, and you, even especially as a kid, think that they're the worst thing in the world. And it's funny because, you know, I get like sometimes that kind of complex of like, okay, yeah, but I'm actually like dealing with people's lives here, you know? Yeah. But, you know, but at the same time, you have to be like, okay, you know, I was a kid, and can you not have some empathy with this poor kid for, you know, the struggles of, I mean, literally, like, I can't, I know I'm like blanking. I'm like with sitting with the right group at lunchtime, you know, and it's
Yeah.
like, that's a struggle. And that's like the stress of their lives. And you know, and of course these ones living in Derry where their whole town is haunted. And I love that concept of like a whole town being haunted. But that's, I mean, they each are living that, but also like not necessarily sharing it all, and not, and still kind of like hiding and just putting on that front. And you know, there's just so much to it that it's like spot on. You're not like sharing your, you know, you're not going to therapy with you're the toughest guy, or you're just silent. And at least in as I was growing up, like you didn't go out and share all that stuff when it's like, and the fact that finally somebody does actually, and you're like, oh, it just feels so good when they finally go,
yeah. You're like, we are like, I'm not the only one that feels these things.
Absolutely. And I think it works well for this story to tell it in that alternating narrative where you see them as children and you see them as adults, because it's a good reflection of how the things that you go through or that scare you or that affect you when you're kids can present in different ways, because we see the different characters. You know, some of them have the bad things that have happened to them have followed them through life and they're having similar difficulties, or some of them have repressed those feelings to the point that when they come back, they can't handle it anymore and they totally break down. And then you see other people who have tried to work through it, and you see all of those different ways of dealing with that childhood, which for them is childhood trauma. And it's interesting. And I think that he does a really good job of reflecting how that would impact you, even with the kind of forgetfulness that happens in between, the way that you erase things and you think that you forget about them and you believe that you have moved on from them, but they're actually in there and they come back to affect you in a real way. So I think using and which is what Stephen King does, right? He uses the monster to show you the actual terrifying things about being a human being, and it's why he's so successful.
Yeah, I think you're dead on with that. As you know, he, you know, like Sapkowski, we were like, yeah, where people are the real monsters, right? Well, it's like sometimes the monster's inside you, you know, and you don't know it's there until, like Sarah said, like, and I mean, in the book it happens all the time, but it also made me think about it. It was like, yeah, I've had that happen before. Like I've had really bad things happen to me when I was a kid, and then you like, I don't know what to say, you repress them, but maybe they just fade over time. And then something happens to you when you're an adult and you're just like, oh yeah, that happened, you know? And it's like, or that's happened to me too. Or someone confides in you and you're like,
absolutely,
yeah, that's happened to me too, man. Like it's crazy, you know? But like Stephen King just knows how to, you know, navigate those things without, because sometimes like, I've read other books where authors will say stuff that Stephen King also says, but the way they say it, it's like they smack you with it, and you're just like, you know, it's not believable. But like Stephen King, he's like, because he's really slow pacing and he goes off on tangents, the way he brings it together, you're just like, oh yeah, he's right. He is right. You know,
absolutely.
Well, and I was going to say, like, I mean, I've read books because I'm not a therapist, but I deal with therapists a lot in my work. And one of those things that's interesting is that childhood trauma can come back. That's good. You got called out, Sarah. That's messed
Right.
up.
I was already mean about you, Kyle. You just missed it. So you're late.
Yeah, it's true. But like essentially like childhood trauma, if you don't like address it in some way, like whereas either talk about it or write it down or whatever, then what happens is your body even just kind of relating to that thing. And again, this is my very much lay opinion on this. But like your body does like a fight, flight, freeze like reaction to it when you approach it now as an adult, even unless you actually like work it through and deal with it and make it something that doesn't cause you fight, flight, freeze, like, which is really interesting. And it just feels like King was ahead of his time and like kind of understanding some of that. But also, I mean, it helped obviously with the narrative in general, just where, you know, where they're slowly remembering things and where they kind of go back and go, oh, okay, this is like, and kind of get into that. So it's really well told. It's just, I don't know. I just felt like he really pushed it on so many levels. And like you both said, he's just at the top of his game.
It really creeps up on you. And it's interesting because we think and talk and pay a lot more attention to these things now than we did in, you know, the era when this book was written and released. So I think you are right in that he was ahead of his time for talking about these kinds of things and thematically exploring them. And I think that it takes an event where you find someone who is a really talented writer, someone who understands stories, understands people, can convey a story in a good way. And then unfortunately for Stephen King, someone who's had a really hard life. So, you know, he's gone through a lot of things. He's had a lot of experiences that would make you feel that way. And he can then translate that using the talent that he has. So I guess it's like that combination of factors that came together to allow him to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think, you know, Trigger, she has a awesome point here. It's like, yeah, real world problems, you know, and then, you know what, I'm going to throw a monster right on top of it. So
Absolutely.
Well, and I think that is as much, and like Bryce said, I think he was ahead of his time because really, I think a lot of this book was about working through your trauma, even more than defeating because actually the actual fighting of the creature, was a very small portion of this book. It was always tiptoeing
1,000
around.
pages. It's like you get 5.
Yeah. You get like 2 chapters or something like that of actually fighting the thing. But it's all about like working around your trauma, remembering what it was, you know. And one thing I always thought was you know, because this book took a long time to get through. The thing I was thinking the whole time is like, man, all these people after they, you know, because you knew that they beat it when they were kids, especially if you've watched the movies or the miniseries. But you're like, man, they're all really successful as adults. Like one's like owns a taxi service for the wealthy and the celebrities. One's like an architect. The other one's like a best-selling writer. One, Beverly, is she a clothing designer? Is that what she was? Like a big-time clothing designer.
Yep.
You know, so it's like, well, it's just like weird. Like, how is it that every single one of them became super successful,
except for Mike, who stayed?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
who records.
You know, was that in your guys' head as you were going through? You're like, man, these people did pretty well.
It mentions at one point, that's what Mike is like. Look, I'm the only one that stayed, and I still like I make $11,000 a year as a librarian, right?
Right.
And he's like, but each and every one of you went away, forgot everything, and you're super successful. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, spot on. And it's like exactly why it's exactly like what you're saying, Joe, is just like they're trying to, more importantly, is facing your actual fears because Beverly could face a crazy monster demon, but not her abusive husband. And that took how long to do that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah. And you know, that was such a, you know, weird thing is it's like, you know, they all had things that, like you said, Rice, is like, if you don't deal with them, they become harder to deal with over time. And that is actually what I think. maybe that's what the whole book was about, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
Good point.
I don't know. What do you think, Sarah?
No, I do think that, and I think thematically, it is a book that was written long enough ago that you wouldn't expect to find any of this kind of mental health exploration in it. But you
Yeah,
could read it now in 2024
makes sense.
and use the structure and the social framework that we have, and it makes perfect sense. And you can get all of these things out of it, which is, as we already said, I think that the reason that it was ahead of its time and probably had the amount of cultural impact that it did, aside from the fact that it was it was scary and the characters are iconic, and those things all help. But absolutely, I think it is more about overcoming those fears than fighting a monster.
Well, and like how pro, like, I mean, I don't know, so many things in our world right now that we're kind of realizing, like, I mean, just where it was like there's so many racists in the book, but it's like very pro, like, they had the black friend, and it was like, this is a okay thing, right? Like back then.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, there's so many elements of that, but despite the fact that like the language in it is rough, and it is, the N-word is used way more than I was ready for.
Yeah.
Especially on audio. I feel like when you're hearing it, you're like,
yes.
oh, whoa, that is. Because
like,
I feel like
bang, bang. You're like,
right. Because I think
Yeah.
the way that I think about things when I read it, I'm just like self-censoring. I'm like, oh, that's a word that I'm skipping. Like my eyes are just like automatically going over it. But in audio, it's just like, bam.
How hard it would be to read it.
Right. You're like, your job is to do this. I thought that the whole time. I know. I was actually looking him up. I was like, the narrator, Steven Weber, at least mine, I assume that was the same one for everyone. So good. It was, just nailed it, and nailed the like freak outs and the stuttering, the sister stuttering. And
oh yeah. Yeah. I would think, because I have the physical book behind me too, but like I knew I wouldn't finish it in time. But I was just like, it would be so hard to read, because he wrote this in the early 80s, and stuff. But like a lot of those words that are in this book, a lot are words that like, you may only hear like once a month, if you're in a big city or you're just walking around, you may never hear anybody really say these words anymore. But like back in the day. But the great thing about it also is it showed that, people were using these terms, but it also showed that it was turning.
Yeah.
It was, from the flashbacks in the 50s, it seemed like people were just throwing it out. And the way he had some of the people talking about it, they were saying these words and these derogatory statements, but they weren't saying, some of them weren't even saying them in a negative fashion. They weren't like calling the person that like in a mean way. They were just like, it's just passive, like, oh, so-and-so is a so-and-so. And you're just like,
right.
But then when they jump to 85, it's like you can feel, Stephen King's like turning, like, we don't, only the bad people
That's a good point.
say the bad words now in 85, and you're like, okay, at least, and especially it being released in 85 or 84, it's like, it had that, you could feel the turn, and that was, I think the late 80s and early 90s was when that a really big shift in our culture really happened. Because like when I was growing up, it was, it was like, I think we were maybe even nicer to each other than we are now. But I just love when books do that, where you kind of get that transformation of people and characters.
Absolutely. And it's nice when you can see a definitive change in setting, and when it feels different to read. It's good writing when you can read one section of a book and feel like you are in a certain time, and then read the other section and be like, okay, this feels very different to me, and I can really tell that we're in a different time.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, and he also does something else in this book that, I've read books since then. Even I think I forget what the book was, but one of the Dresden Files books was SplatterCon, was basically based off of this premise, of everyone has a different fear.
Yeah.
And in Dresden, it was slasher films, right? So whatever slasher film scared you was what monster was coming after you, right? And Stephen King kind of, did that back in '85, right? He was like the werewolf, the mummy. I don't know if other writers have done that, but this is the oldest book that I've read that had this kind of concept in it, where it really becomes your fear. And I thought that was really cool, because that's one thing I kind of forgot. I kind of forgot that it wasn't just the clown. It was whatever you were afraid of.
Or it'd be like the werewolf would have like orange like whiskers or something, like something that was close, like that would still like tie it together.
Cool.
Yeah, well, that's why I said from the beginning, as you're going, it's hard to remember that this is like likely like the reason why we see these as just a normal thing, like that it is a normal to have like, oh, everyone's fear is coming out. I mean, what else is what's his face, the Scarecrow in the Batman universe is like your fear is coming out, and it like, I mean, is it kind of from this? I would guess. I would hazard a guess here.
I would bet that Stephen King, especially in this era, created a lot of pop culture things that we just take for granted now.
Absolutely.
But like as we kind of went in, one other thing I loved, what I loved and I didn't understand, I like Bryce said, like the haunted town of Derry. I love that concept, and I love, like, that was one thing. Like normally books over 700 pages, like a little bit, like a lot of fluff, but this was really like a trilogy in one book.
Yeah.
It felt like a trilogy in one book, where it's like, oh, you could stop here for a little bit and be okay, and then continue. But there was so much background on this town, and when they really started finding the tidbits about Pennywise and how long he's been around. I love that. I love history. So I just loved how they're like, oh yeah, we found a picture from 1863, like one of the first photos ever taken, and Pennywise is in the background, like doing a headstand or something like that.
Yeah.
Which just makes it feel even creepier when you get that generational fear. Just it makes it even worse. Well,
and okay, so bouncing around here, we won't necessarily talk about the ending, but like they theorize like how long has he been here. Like I remember I wrote down, like they mentioned, one of the first things they mentioned was like 1741. They were pretty sure that he was the reason that like everyone disappeared from Derry in 1741.
And they kind of related to like, what is it, Roanoke or
Roanoke. They said the only other time something like that had happened was in Roanoke. And I was just like, dude, that is such a cool thing to kind of throw in there.
Well, it's kind of what you do with your stuff, right? Is like, that's why I was just like, that's what you do. Like, it's fun. That makes it really cool to like
make
those things like,
feel more real.
Yeah.
But then they kind of go on and they start talking about like, is he an alien? Like, what do you guys think? Do you think he was actually an alien? Or is he like then they talked about interdimensional beings.
Right.
And so what is your guys' theory about Pennywise?
I definitely went with, just especially with Dark Tower in my background, I went full blown like, oh yeah, multiverse, like this is just something
the
sucked
turtle
into ours.
They kept talking about the turtle. I'm like, the turtle. Well, are we talking about the same turtle here? Are we like?
Absolutely. And that's, my mind always goes there with Stephen King, and it's probably because my foundation of King is Dark Tower, so I tend to look at all of his books through the lens of Dark Tower.
Especially with so many connections, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm just like, which world did you come from? How'd you get sucked into this space, and where do you actually belong?
And isn't that, there are other worlds than these? Isn't that a Dark Tower line? Like,
absolutely.
Well, and from watching the movies, of course, I watched the movies before I read the book. I read Dark Tower was my entry to it, and I thought to myself, is Pennywise Roland's child thing? Because they were spiders, right? Like it was like, but then my friend Nathan, he thinks that Pennywise is the same creature as the creature in the Dark Tower that was like funny and sapping all their life force from the laughter. So I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, since you've both, have read through the Dark Tower and stuff.
I don't tend to think that he is any other creature from.
You think he's his own
entity, but I think seeing things like that pop up, like I don't remember what form.
Mordred, was that his name?
Mordred is the son, but I mean the one that sucks the laughter out. What?
Yeah, I
wasn't
forget what
they
they called him.
Me too. But I just assume that, right, that these things all come from a similar origin, and they just get, like, not the horsemen of the apocalypse, but the creepy creatures of Stephen King's multiverse. They just all get like pinged off in different directions. And
I like the commentary, but the comment, I don't know how to pronounce the commenter's name, but I think that's a good spot on definition there. That's a good one for me. I'll take that. All I know is I need to reread the Dark Tower. Apparently, I recognize now that you say that, and I'm like, oh, I should have put that together. Like, oh, that's a good spot. Like, I think anyway, I need to go reread that.
Yeah,
and the more King I read, the more I see the Lovecraftian stuff. Like, it pops up every now and then in certain books, and definitely you can see the influence.
Well, yeah, he came right out and said it in Fairy Tale. Basically, it's like, that Fairy Tale is like a Lovecraft is his main into that.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, I thought King is known for like dropping an ending, right? Not having a great ending, or not caring about a great ending.
Yeah, not
I
caring.
I thought this was a good one. I thought this one, like, at least it felt satisfying, and like I go and like
I hold silver.
Exactly, like that was like.
I think thematically it really fits. It it brings it all together. It's a good ending point, and I am more forgiving of Stephen King's endings than a lot of people, because I tend to think that. I guess, like Stephen King, I don't think it's the ending that counts. I don't think that that's what we were working toward in a lot of these books, is this grand ending that wraps everything up. I think, unfortunately, the horrors persist, and so does the story. And so there's not always a really neat little ending that we can tie it up in. So some I enjoy more than others, but I do like this ending.
I like what you said there. It's just, for his way of doing things, because in certain stories an ending does matter, because you're like,
Absolutely.
That's the whole mystery or whatever.
That's the whole point.
If it is a mystery, it's the whole point.
Yeah.
But you're right. That's a good point, is the way that Stephen King kind of does this is like, I'm here for, showing you like this real life, these friendships, these characters. Like, he just does these characters so well that you like feel like them, like you could touch them. Like, that's how real they are.
Well, yeah, I definitely I agree with you in although I really did like it was, you kind of got a happy ending there. But I think what he does is he balances certain things with his shorter books. You do have impactful endings, like in Cujo. Like, the ending on Cujo was crazy.
Yeah.
And then Carrie had a pretty stellar ending,
Mm-hmm.
but like these books, like the last Dark Tower book's like 900 pages,
Mm-hmm.
And then this book's like almost 1,200 pages, but he had so much time to flush everything out that you're like, well, I wasn't like having to have this crazy bang ending, because you've told us everything about everybody, so we're like Bryce said, we got invested. By the end, you're like, we've been doing this so long, like I feel like I know all these people. Like, I feel things for certain people, and one thing that I think Stephen King did really well in this book, and is it's kind of like, not. We'll throw that one scene off to the side here, because that's just that was.
I still am like, was that necessary? Did they need to bond even more?
Yeah,
like, I don't know.
The power of friendship had been established.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll put that to the side.
Mm-hmm.
But he really did the beginnings of like puppy love, and he did that so well with Bill and Ben and Beverly. It's like, because I can remember being 12 years old and you start liking girls, and it's like, that's how you feel. You just have these warm feelings inside, and you don't know what you're doing and how you're supposed to act. Like, am I supposed to be a tough guy? Am I supposed to be the sweet guy? Like, and
then Beverly's like, I think I know who the letter's from, but I know who I want it to be from.
Yeah. And like, my son's 10 years old. They're starting to really like, oh, girlfriends and boyfriends are appearing, in just name, really, nothing else. Just like, oh, I like you as a friend, you like me as a friend, so we'll be boyfriend and girlfriend.
Yes, it's the idea of the thing, not the thing.
Yeah, so as
the
I'm
mimicking.
yeah, so as I'm reading this book, I'm just like, and then I see it kind of playing out, and like, yeah, like
it's so good.
So I don't know, like, and Sarah, from like, from a woman's perspective, like the way Beverly was acting, did Stephen King do well in the aspect of, girls and women?
Well, I feel like Beverly is a very specific type of character, and I'm not sure that my childhood and hers match up very well. I had a very
Like, I had great parents,
warm childhood, which Beverly did not. So I feel like that difference is there, but it's the same thing, right? Just on the, whenever those feelings start, and whomever you have those feelings for, they, I think for all of us, it's a really awkward time of trying to understand why you feel that way and manage how you feel and articulate how you feel. And it's just a jumble. I've never met anyone who was well-adjusted or suave in those circumstances. Like, there's just no kid who can do that. So but he does get like the awkwardness of the whole thing, I think, really well.
Oh man. Well, in my work, I deal a lot with abuse, neglect, all these things. And I'm like, oh, it's hard to read, because you're going, he's spot on.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
It's hard to leave an abusive relationship. And being a kid, like, what do you do? Sometimes we don't find out until the kid has like divulged something to a teacher at school, and then the teacher's like, oh my gosh, like, and immediately gets CPS involved, and then we're involved too, and it's like, but how long has this been going on that this kid's had to like be living this way, and they just know this is like the way of life? And even the devil is better than the one you don't, and
that was big.
Again, it's like, it's all just so true. And again, it does seem like it comes from a real place for him, the fact that it's just so realistic.
Absolutely. I'm just gonna quickly interject. I have about 10 more minutes, because I do have to give up my computer to my husband. Well, it's his computer. I have to give him back.
We can fight him.
Yeah.
But so if there's anything like burning that you're like, yes, we need to do this question, then I'm happy to jump into whatever.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to try to keep this to about an hour, and I love that we're 52 minutes in here and we've barely talked about the monster.
Right,
like,
we're just
like, good this book
we have so many things to say.
Like, that's how good and how big this book is, that we can just like, and I think that, and again, like, Sarah can speak on this probably better than I can, but like the whole book, the theme of the book is this child, this getting over trauma and stuff. It's like, and in things that happen to these kids, actually kind of, they make me angry, and because some of the stuff I went through too, and that's what I want out of a book. Like, I don't need like themes shoved down my throat and stuff, but I do want you to make me feel something. I want you to either make me super happy, super excited, or make me mad. No, don't make me mad because the stuff you're writing is stupid, but like Iron Widow. Okay, I just read I can't. But but this book, like the stuff that these kids had to go through, just made me angry, and I'm just like, I want them to win in the end. God, I want them to win.
You needed it, exactly.
So Sarah, if maybe you can speak on that, portion of it.
Sure, yeah. So I think we talk a lot about the Losers Club because they're the main characters, but you also have, like, we get to see through those little vignettes and the parts that pop up, you also get to see the kids who didn't have the group of friends who were extra isolated or had no protective factors, no safety net, and the horrible things that happen to them. They die. Like, we see a lot of kids die. We see terrible things happen to children or other marginalized people. And I think that is part of what makes the book so scary too, is because unfortunately, in lots of cases where you don't have a foundational friendship, where you don't have that one person who's going to help you, or you don't have that relationship that's going to help you pull through, really terrible and sad things do happen. And Stephen King does not shy away from that, which I think is what makes it really difficult for a lot of people to read his books, is because bad things are going to happen, and they're not going to necessarily happen to the bad people. They're going to happen to the sad people and the lonely people and the disenfranchised people. And it sucks. And you do want them to feel, you want them to win, and you don't want, the kid to be killed in the backyard and the garden shed, or like the things that happen in this book. And that's the terrible part. And, we see it, the way that it plays out in adulthood. When we see Stan, for example, before we even get to know him, we don't know anything about his character. When we see the path that his adulthood takes, and you're like, whoa, why did this happen at the beginning? And it's only when you go back and you see the characters, and then you start to like build up that care for them. You're like, oh, now my heart is like retroactively ripped out because of what happened. And it's that, I think, is what makes this book resonate so much, and what makes it stay with you, is because you have developed those attachments, and you do see that these really unfair and harmful things are happening, and there's nothing that anyone can do. And I think as an adult reading the book, because you talked a little bit earlier about reading this at different stages of your life, I think as an adult reading this book, it just reminds you of the times that does happen. And especially if you work in a field like that, where you're like, I can't fix this, and it sucks. And I think that's one thing that Stephen King acknowledges, is that there are some things that are so awful and nobody helps. And, and it's heartbreaking.
And I think that what makes the glory of the Losers Club so much more amazing, right? It
Absolutely.
was the losers that came together, and if only those other people had a club, had a group, and and even, again, it's just like kind of a hopeful message in a Stephen King book. That's like develop community, right? Develop your group. And that's the beauty of like BookTube and stuff like this, where you come on here going, I don't have people that read the same stuff as I do, but we can, and we can create that space. And why you have it's such a fun space to be in, because you have, this great comment section, just like, more power to you, this is great. Like, we love the same thing, and we can, analyze these things together, because there are those people that are lost along the way, and we're experiencing it almost like worse and worse as a society, and I just think that all those, when King points to all the really sad, lonely people, and that just makes the triumph of this Losers Club, man, and that they were just so nice. I don't know, you just felt like so great when they just allow, is it Ben Hanscom, to just hey, just meet us here tomorrow, you're part of it. Like,
it's okay.
We're
You're one of us
now. You became friends because we did this stupid thing together. And that's the beauty of children. Like, they can just let that happen. I remember making friends like that. Like, my kids all the time are like the McDonald's play place friends. Mm-hmm. And you're like, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, we'll never see them again, I'm sure.
Right. And you lose that as an adult. You lose it as a grown-up. That is a childhood thing. And it's funny because you can get, like, Stephen King can inject that like friendship is magic message without it being corny or like, it's just, it feels natural. And probably part of that is because it's juxtaposed with this like horrifying tragedy. You're like, okay, well, now we can see why it's so important to be friends. He doesn't have to spell out for you like, it's important to be friends with people.
Friendship is caring.
Exactly. You just see it through their relationship.
Sharing is caring. It can be fun. No, but I agree with you guys. It's like, and with both of you, and then what Bryce said is, with BookTube as a community, it's like, I think one of the messages here is, if you have a group of friends and you all stick together, yes, you will go through bad things, but it will be better to be in the losers group, having bad things happen to you and having to fall back on each other, than, like Sarah said, to be the people who don't have that, because it's going to be even worse. Like, how, you guys are like best of friends, and you talk about all your hurts and your problems, and you're like, man, the world sucks. But then if you look out, like, how bad is it for the people who don't have us?
Right.
And as Bryce said, it's like, we got 40 some people, here in this group, watching this together, and I don't have very many real people in real life that read books or read the kind of books that I read. So this is great. I mean, I love having you guys on and making real friendships and stuff through BookTube and through, Stephen King and everything. It's like, that's the best part about BookTube and, and life in general is finding your group.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I know Sarah has to bounce out. But Sarah, do you have anything coming up here soon? Are you on any other lives? Are you trying to put out some videos?
So it's all been such a disaster this year, like in a good way, just a busy, like very full life that has made it hard to do other things. So not like a bad, sad disaster, but just finding the time. So I am eternally hopeful. I don't know. That probably says more about me
I'm
than
so
the
glad that
reality
you
of the
came on here.
But yes, thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much. I always have fun when we're chatting about books, and I'm really, really happy. I'm glad I could meet you, Bryce, and talk to everybody else who is here. But if anything is coming up, I will let you know. If you want to talk about anything else, please, either of you ask me, because I will definitely make time for lives. I just, the organization piece is missing right now.
Yeah,
so.
I feel it.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I will hop off. You guys can say bye to everybody, but thank you so much for having me.
Bye, Sarah. Yeah. Thank you so much. All right, Bryce, what are you doing? Because I know you're trying to ramp up and make sure you're getting out, a few videos a week. What do you got going on?
I mean, every time I say that, then it's like,
You're like, yeah, I'm ramping it up, and then it's like, hiccup.
My problem was earlier this year. I was like, you know what? I'm going to hang my own shingle. I'm going to go out on my own and still try to keep up on BookTube. And it's like I would love to keep it going, but it's like every time I try, it's it's like 3 steps back, 2 steps forward. So I've been trying, and even just this last week, I was trying not to go any less than 2 videos a week. And last week I was at 1, and now it's happened a couple times in the last little bit. So it's just, we're making, and that's why I'm like, this has been my week of live streams though. They're so much fun. Like, but this is like why you do this. Like, it's so much fun to just,
this is the best part.
Exactly. And so, So anyway, we're trying. I mean, I would love to get to at least 3 videos a week, if not 4, but it's not gonna happen in the next couple months for sure. I'm still trying to figure this out.
I'm right there with you. Like, I want to do 3. I'd love to do more, but it's like if I get 2 in, I'm like, okay, I got 2. I got 2 in. I got a live maybe. I'm like, that'll suffice. But yeah, I'm trying to ramp it up too. But it's just hard. And then life, like kids, it's like, do I have time to read all the books I want to read? I got on the 9th, I'll have Kevin Hearn, the Iron Druid guy.
I need to read some of that first.
So if you guys are still watching, the 9th is going to be another big author. So
that's so cool. I love, and that was so much fun watching you with Jim Butcher, and you had great. I felt like your questions were really good. That not everybody's asking him, and so that was fun.
Well, that's what I try to do. Like, I'm not trying to hardball question any of these guys because they were not, or these people because they're nice enough to come on. But I do want to ask them things that not everyone hasn't heard 100 times. But so everybody go check out Bryce's channel. He's making it work over there, and getting to be on all the fancy live streams here recently. So that is great. But guys, thank you all for watching. Go read the book It if you haven't. I'm gonna try to rewatch the movies here in the next couple days just to kind of see how it went. But you'll all float with us. You'll